Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
There you hear the bongs of Big Ben. It's 5 o'clock here in Westminster. It's been a busy afternoon. Today, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt delivered what's likely to be the last budget before the general election, telling MPs his new policies would lead to long-term growth and permanent tax cuts. Mr Hunt said he wanted his budget to unleash people power. The leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, called Mr Hunt's budget the last desperate act of a party that's failed. Well, let's take a look at some of the key announcements today. We'll begin with tax. The Chancellor's announced that national insurance will be cut by another 2 pence in the pound. He says the cut, which will begin next month, is worth £450 a year for the average worker. The earnings threshold for child benefits been raised to £60,000 from £50,000. The government's frozen the fuel duty again and kept the 5p cut in fuel duty on petrol and diesel due to end later this month for a further year. The government's also kept a freeze on alcohol duty, which had been due to end in August. That will now continue until next February. Mr Hunt's also announced a longer repayment period for people on benefits taking out emergency budgeting loans. There'll be an increase in the VAT threshold for small businesses. It'll go up from £85,000 to £90,000. Let's go back to more taxes. There'll be a new tax on vaping products to start in October 2026, and the existing tax on tobacco is going to go up. The Chancellor says it's in order to maintain the financial incentive to choose vaping over smoking. A windfall tax on the profits of energy firms, which had been scheduled to end in March 2028, will now be extended until 2029. And the air passenger duty, which is a tax paid on flights, will go up for business class seats. The non-dom tax regime for UK residents whose permanent homes overseas will now be replaced with new rules from April 2025. Let's move on to the broader picture for the UK economy, and the Office for Budget Responsibility has predicted that the UK economy will grow by 0.8% this year and 1.9% next year. Remember, we are in a technical recession at the moment. The UK's inflation rate's also forecast to fall below 2% of the 2% target this year. Now let's move on to debt, and the underlying debt, excluding Bank of England debts, forecast to be 91.7% of GDP this year, rising to 92.8% next year. Lots of figures and numbers, but it's important that we take you through the main developments from today's budget. And in a moment, I'll be discussing this in finer detail with my colleague, our political correspondent, Layla Nafu. And I'll also be joined by our economics correspondent, Andy Verity, who's in the newsroom for us. But first, our political correspondent, Helen Catt, looks back at the day's developments here in Westminster.
Is this an election-winning budget, Chancellor?
As Jeremy Hunt posed for the last budget photo call before an election, he would have known that a lot was riding on the speech inside that red box. The economy has dipped into recession. The polls suggest that support for the Conservatives remains stubbornly low. Mr Hunt and the Tories have pinned their hopes on offering